Ready for a deep dive. We're tackling the São Paulo mayoral race this time, and let me tell you, these articles from Metropolis are
It's
wild.
definitely eye-catching, and this election is a big deal, not just for São Paulo, but for all of Brazil, really.
I can already tell. Okay, so this incident with candidate Marçal. Video, accusations of a staged fight, even claims someone ripped clothes to make it look like an assault. It's like something you'd see on TV, not real life.
It's quite a story. This involved Marçal's lawyer and an assessor, basically a close advisor, working for Duda Lima, who's running against him.
This all happened after one of the debates. What even went down?
Seems like an argument, things got heated. Allegedly, the video shows Marçal's lawyer grabbing the assessor after the assessor punched a videographer. So naturally, both sides are pointing fingers.
Yeah, the articles mention some conflicting accounts of what happened, right?
Exactly. Marçal's lawyer is saying self-defense, while Dudalina's side is claiming it was all staged. They're even accusing the lawyer of tearing the assessor's shirt on purpose to make fake evidence.
Seriously, makes you wonder how much of what we see during these campaigns is actually real and how much is for the cameras. Where's the line between, like, genuine conflict and political theater?
A lot of people are asking that very question right now.
Uh,
This is exactly the kind of thing that makes you think about how easily misinformation can spread, especially these days with social media, and how that affects how the public sees things.
And speaking of Marçal causing a stir, this whole thing about his comments on women voters, that was in these articles too, right?
Right, separate from the altercation, there's this statement Marcel made, something about women not voting for other women because they're intelligent, supposedly. As you can imagine, that didn't go over well.
That's bold, to say the least, especially during an election.
You can say that again. And it's caused quite a backlash. One interesting reaction was from a cheese company, actually. Turns out the owners had donated to Marcel's campaign. They came out publicly saying they weren't happy about the comments, even hinted they might pull their support.
Talk about bad publicity, ouch. It does make you wonder, was this a calculated move to appeal to a specific group, or did he really mean it? Either way, it shows how important social issues are in this election.
Absolutely. Which brings up a really important point. It's not just about the personalities or even these scandals.
Yeah.
This fight, dramatic as it was, it's just one piece of a much bigger, messier picture.
So there's more to this than meets the eye. Okay,
Yeah.
let's unpack that. Beyond the headlines, what's really driving this election? What are the big issues we need to understand?
Yeah, there's definitely more to it. We talked about Marsal's comments, but to really get it, we need to zoom out a bit. Look at the bigger picture of social issues in Brazil.
Okay, help me connect the dots. These comments about women voters, how do they fit into that bigger picture?
Well, Brazil, like a lot of places, has this history of gender inequality in politics. You see fewer women in elected office. Their concerns aren't always a priority. So when a candidate says something like that, it brings up these existing tensions, right? Suddenly it becomes about something bigger, the role of women in Brazilian society, in politics, the whole thing.
So it's like his comments are a spark, but they're igniting a much bigger debate.
Exactly. And it ties into other social issues that are coming up in this election. Like there was an article about a debate, focused a lot on religion, what to do about drugs, women's issues again.
It sounds like these are more than just talking points. This is stuff that really matters to voters in São Paulo.
100%. And it makes sense, right? São Paulo is so diverse. It's like a mix of everything, cultures, perspectives, you name it. So it makes sense that these issues would be front and center when you're talking about who runs the city.
Which brings me to something else I was thinking about. Besides Marçal, who else is even running? I know we touched on Duda Lima, but weren't there some other big names in those articles?
Oh, right. Guilherme Boulos is another one. Some people actually think he's the front runner. His name came up a lot, usually in comparison to Marçal, and interestingly, with all the talk about the polls.
The polls, right. Every article seemed to have a different opinion on who is winning. Is it just me, or are these polls impossible to decipher?
No, you're not alone. It's all over the place. One day Marçal's ahead, the next it's Boulos. And then there's the current mayor, Ricardo Nunes. His team's internal polls, the ones they do themselves, show them being really worried about Boulos. Gives you an idea of how things might be moving behind the scenes.
Sounds like a game of chess, everyone watching every move. And speaking of strategy, I wanted to ask about the different platforms in this election. We've talked about the drama, but what about the actual issues? What are they promising?
The million-dollar question, right?
Okay.
Besides the headlines, what do they actually want to do for São Paulo?
And, maybe even more important, can they actually do it? But before we get into the nitty-gritty of platforms, I have to ask, Why should any of this matter to someone who doesn't even live in Brazil? What's the bigger picture here?
Well, it's a good question. For one thing, Sao Paulo isn't just some city, you know.
Hmm?
It's huge, biggest in South America, and a big player globally, too, economically speaking. Kind of like Brazil's economic engine, you could say.
So what happens there has ripple effects. It's not just contained there in
Yeah.
Brazil.
Right. The stuff they do in Sao Paulo, policy-wise, often ends up influencing national policy for the whole country. And don't forget, Brazil is a major exporter, coffee, airplanes, you name it. So decisions made in Sao Paulo, they can actually impact the global market. It's a big deal.
Wow. So it's not just about picking a mayor. It's about the future of this global city. No pressure or anything,
Wow.
right? But seriously, what kind of challenges will the next mayor have to deal with? What are they walking into?
Good question. I mean, Sao Paulo is dealing with the same stuff as a lot of fast-growing cities. Income inequality, not enough infrastructure, environmental concerns, that kind of thing. How they tackle those issues, it'll have a real impact on a lot of people. Millions, actually.
And earlier you were saying how this election, it might be a preview of sorts. Like we might see some of these same strategies in the presidential elections coming up.
It's possible, yeah. Don't forget, Brazil's got this multi-party system. That means to get anywhere in politics, you need coalitions, got to work together. So the alliances we're seeing now, even the rivalries, they could easily carry over to the national level.
So everyone's watching this election closely, trying to get a sense of where things might go with Brazilian politics in general.
Absolutely. And since what happens in Brazil often has an effect on the rest of the world, well, understanding this election can give you some real insight.
This has been a fascinating deep dive. Okay, before we go, let's sum up. What are the key takeaways here?
So we've seen how this one election in Sao Paulo is like a microcosm.
Yeah.
You know, it reflects all these larger social and political forces that are happening in Brazil right now.
We've got scandal, accusations of staged events, people arguing passionately about gender equality, religious freedom. Those social issues are front and center in this election.
Yeah, and beyond the drama, remember, there are very real long-term consequences. Whoever ends up the mayor of Sao Paulo, they're making decisions that could affect the entire country, even the world.
It's a good reminder that local politics, they matter more than you think, sometimes on a global scale even. So here's something to think about as you keep up with this election. Given how intense it's been, how much is at stake, what does all this tell us about how politics work in Brazil today? That's something to ponder. And that's all the time we have for today.